Back in the day, there was this pond, about half a mile from my old stomping grounds. We called it Daryl's Pond, though who Daryl was remains a mystery to this day. It was one of those places nobody really owned, so folks would occasionally drop by for a spot of fishing. Most times it was just me, flying solo. I'd set up my gear, anchor my kayak in the middle, and cast my line, hoping for a bite. On this particular afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I was out on the water, angling for a catch. As luck would have it, I spotted another soul emerging from the trees. I gave him a friendly wave and a grin as he hopped into a small boat nearby and started rowing my way. When he drew near enough for conversation, I figured it was safe to strike up a chat without seeming too forward. I greeted him with a friendly remark about the weather, to which he agreed with a nod. But after that, the conversation seemed to fizzle out, leaving me feeling a bit awkward, like I was responsible for keeping the dialogue flowing. "So, you out here for some fishing?" I ventured, trying to break the silence. He shook his head. "No, not really into fishing." "Well, can't blame you. It's always nice to chill by the pond," I replied, attempting to keep the conversation going. As he rowed closer, his boat bumped into mine with a resounding thud, making me squirm uncomfortably. At 24, I found myself sharing the water with a man easily twice my age, and the situation felt increasingly strange. An uneasy silence settled between us. I feigned concentration on my fishing line, though my mind was preoccupied with the oddness of the encounter. This guy was giving off vibes I couldn't quite place, and I found myself edging away, subtly adjusting my position to put some distance between us. I stole a quick glance to my right, catching him staring at me. Feeling a surge of boldness, I locked eyes with him for a few seconds until he looked away. "So, where are you from?" I ventured, breaking the tension. He pointed vaguely behind him, towards the wooded hill beyond the dirt road. "Just up there," he replied cryptically. "Oh, near Suffolk?" I probed. He shook his head. "No, not really." I pressed on, trying to keep the conversation afloat. "What brings you out here today?" His response was curt. "Why not?" I continued to struggle through the uncomfortable silences, desperately attempting to fill the void with small talk. But his replies remained dry, leaving me to carry the weight of what barely qualified as a conversation. He sat there, expression unchanged, offering little more than a half-hearted smile as he gazed in my direction. At this point, I was thoroughly creeped out. My heart raced, and a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Surrounded by trees on all sides, with nothing but water beneath us, I began to row subtly towards the shore, trying my best to maintain an air of nonchalance. Maybe I could pass it off as just wanting to change fishing spots. But my blood ran cold when I realized he was following me. "Lovely weather we're having, isn't it?" I attempted to inject some cheer into my voice, though it wavered with apprehension. Drawing closer to the edge of the pond, I finally mustered the nerve to speak up. "You know what? I think I've had enough for today," I said, turning to gauge his reaction. He continued to stare, but the smile had vanished from his face. "I can't let you leave," he replied ominously, his hand moving to reveal a handgun tucked into his jeans pocket. That was my cue to bolt. Before my brain could fully register the danger, instinct kicked in. I leaped out of the boat and scrambled for the safety of solid ground. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I sprinted the entire half-mile uphill, weaving through the dense woods until I reached the sanctuary of my home. Once inside, I bolted every door and window shut, sealing myself off from whatever lurked outside. Pulling down the blinds of the dining room window, I left just a tiny gap for cautious observation. As darkness descended, I kept the house shrouded in darkness, casting furtive glances towards the front yard, vigilant for any signs of pursuit. Hours passed before I dared to breathe a sigh of relief, convinced I hadn't been followed. But in that moment of clarity, I realized the gravity of my mistake, not contacting the authorities immediately. I left the windows in my bedroom cracked open, welcoming the cool night breeze. Being on the second floor, I didn't fret about prying eyes outside. But about 30 minutes after extinguishing the lights and nestling under the covers, a faint sound reached my ears, the crunching of leaves. Instantly, I froze, straining to discern the source of the noise. Normally, I'd brush it off as a passing deer or perhaps a wandering bear. But after the unsettling encounter earlier, paranoia gripped me like a vice. With every sense heightened, I remained motionless, except for the trembling coursing through my body. The footsteps drew closer, until finally, a voice broke the silence. "Hey, you awake up there? Sorry to disturb you. Just passing through." My heart leaped into my throat. It was unmistakably the same voice, sending a chill down my spine. Silently, I slipped out of my room, tiptoeing down the stairs to the safety of the kitchen. My heart hammered in my chest as I reached for the phone, careful to avoid any movement that might betray my presence to whoever lurked outside. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911, finally taking the action I should have taken earlier. Huddled in the temporary refuge of my bedroom, I whispered urgently into the receiver, desperately hoping I hadn't been detected. Every passing minute felt like an eternity as I waited for the authorities to arrive. Fear gnawed at me, imagining every possible threat lurking beyond the walls of my home. When the police conducted a thorough search of the property and surrounding woods, they found nothing. Their suggestion to seek shelter with a friend or family member seemed like the only sensible course of action, and so I packed my bags and sought refuge elsewhere. Though I never encountered the mysterious man again, the lingering sense of unease lingered. Eventually, I made the decision to move, unable to shake the constant fear and paranoia that plagued me. Now, I find solace in the tranquility of fishing by the bay, far from the haunting memories of that unsettling night.
About 3 weeks, maybe a month and a half ago, I found myself back home. My dad, in his infinite wisdom, thought it would be a grand idea for us to try our hand at night fishing. Now, let me tell you, fishing isn't exactly my cup of tea, especially when it's under the cloak of darkness. And if you were to ask me, spending extended periods with my old man isn't high on my list either. You see, our personalities? They're like two peas in a pod, which often leads to clashes more intense than a summer storm. Anyway, against my better judgment, I found myself trudging along the banks of a river near our new digs. Mind you, we live in Oregon, so picture this: dark woods, fallen trees, and enough stumps to trip even the most sure-footed among us. As I stumbled over roots and cursed my luck, my dad, ever the outdoorsman, chuckled and remarked that city life had made me soft. He didn't say it in so many words, but his tone had that rugged cowboy vibe straight out of an old Western flick. The root of our disagreement stemmed from my unfamiliarity with the area, setting the stage for a downward spiral of conflict between my dad and me. The tranquil night quickly turned into a cacophony of heated arguments that echoed through the darkness. Our bickering persisted relentlessly as we made our way along the riverbank, my father questioning my lifestyle choices while I critiqued his approach to parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. Upon reaching the river, a tense silence enveloped us as we unpacked our fishing gear. Perched on a fallen stump, I couldn't shake the chill in my bones, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd grown accustomed to after a year in a balmy climate. It almost felt like my dad's way of penalizing me for daring to leave the Pacific Northwest. Neither of us uttered a word as our bobbers danced on the water's surface. Suddenly, my dad shot up, his flashlight illuminating the figure across the river. There, on the opposite bank, stood a man clad in a bright orange t-shirt and worn jeans, appearing unremarkable except for the machete dangling from his belt. My dad's voice sliced through the tension, ordering me to pack up our belongings. Obediently, I complied, though my hands shook with apprehension. Across the river, my dad engaged in a heated exchange with the mysterious figure. Their words were drowned out by the rushing waters of the rapids, but the man's frantic gestures spoke volumes. With each wave of his hand, my anxiety swelled. Unlike my dad, who often ventured into the wilderness ill-equipped, This stranger seemed armed and potentially dangerous with his menacing machete. Though a river lay between us, its shallow waters offered little barrier to someone determined to cross. The realization dawned on me. If we had inadvertently trespassed onto his land, this man could easily track us down within minutes. "Drop the gear and let's move." My dad's growl snapped me out of my daze. Glancing back one last time, I watched as the man waded into the river, his hand resting ominously on his weapon. With a firm grip on my shoulder, my dad guided me swiftly through the woods, his strides fueled by adrenaline. As an ultramarathon runner, he moved with a speed that belied his age, while I struggled to keep pace, driven more by fear than fitness. The thundering of my own heartbeat drowned out any sound of pursuit as we fled through the woods. I shadowed my dad so closely that I nearly collided with him several times. Finally, we stumbled onto the road, sprinting towards the safety of my parents' home. Once inside, my dad wasted no time securing the doors and scanning the surroundings for any sign of the machete-wielding stranger. After ensuring our safety, we sat down with my mom to recount the evening's events, conveniently omitting the part where we had been at each other's throats. As we retired to bed, the weight of our unspoken apologies hung heavy in the air. The following day, armed with the only firearm he owned, my dad and I returned to the scene, alerting the authorities along the way. The police reassured us that the area was known for its eccentric characters but posed no immediate threat. Upon reaching the spot where we had left our gear, we were met with a disheartening sight. Our fishing poles were bent, lines tangled in the trees, and the tackle box missing. Despite the setback, the experience served as a catalyst for reconciliation between my dad and me. As we trudged home, a temporary truce settled between us, forged by the shared ordeal. The encounter with the mysterious man by the river served as a sobering reminder. Some encounters are best left unexplored.
Hi there, I'm Lee, a 27-year-old guy who loves nothing more than spending my free time out on the water, casting lines with my buddies. When my dad passed away, he left me more than just memories. I inherited his beloved boat, a sleek Azimuth 53. Now, this beauty wasn't your typical fishing vessel. It was built for luxury, designed to make our time at sea as comfortable as possible. For those unfamiliar with the Azimuth 53, let me paint you a picture. Picture a spacious bow, perfect for lounging and soaking up the sun. It's the kind of boat you typically see cruising around for leisure rather than hauling in big catches. Now, to set the stage for our tale, let me walk you through the layout of the boat. Picture starting at the hydraulic bathing platform. To the left, there's a door leading to the crew cabin, although I mainly use it to stow away my fishing gear. On the right, you'll find steps leading up to the cockpit area. All right, let me give you the lowdown on the interior layout of this beauty. Picture this: as you step straight in, you'll find yourself greeted by a cozy setup. To the left, there's a table and an L-shaped sofa, perfect for lounging and enjoying the sea breeze. Opposite the sofa, you'll spot a swanky wet bar area, and just beyond that, a side deck leading to the bow. And let me tell you, the bow isn't lacking in seating either, complete with some plush sunbeds for soaking up those rays. Now, back to the cockpit area. To the right, you'll find more steps leading up to the flybridge. Picture this: panoramic views in total control from the flybridge controls, surrounded by ample seating and a handy table for snacks and drinks. Oh, and here's a pro tip. From up here, you've got a clear view of the entire back of the boat, making it near impossible for anyone to sneak aboard undetected. Over to the right of the helm station, you'll find a nifty little grill and sink setup, perfect for whipping up some fresh catches. Now let's venture inside. There's a sliding door that can be locked for added security. Once you're in, to the right you'll find an oven and a convenient work surface, which doubles up as my bait prep station when I'm fishing. And to the left you've got all the essentials: fridge, sink, food prep area, and a stove for whipping up some grub. And with that, let's dive into the story. My usual fishing routine involves a leisurely hour-long journey south down the English Channel. But feeling a bit adventurous, I decided to spice things up a bit by inviting my best buddy Logan along for the ride. As we cruised to our usual fishing spot, we both agreed to push the boundaries a bit further. Another hour southward, and we found ourselves at a promising location. While Logan tackled the fishing gear, I got to work preparing the bait. With our chairs set up and lines cast, we settled in for a day of angling. By 8 o'clock, with the day's catch secured, we packed up and headed inside. Hungry and feeling ambitious, Logan and I decided to try our hand at making sushi. Spoiler alert, it was a disaster. With our sushi dreams dashed, we settled for a couple of burgers from the freezer. Bellies full, we kicked back in front of the TV, passing the time until around 11 o'clock when Logan called it a night. With a quick good night, he disappeared into his cabin, leaving me to enjoy the quiet solitude of the boat under the starlit sky. Deciding to tidy up the kitchen before calling it a night, I busied myself with the dishes. Just as I was ready to hit the hay, a faint rumble caught my attention. Initially, I brushed it off as the gentle lapping of water against the boat. Curious, I peered out of the window, but the darkness obscured any view beyond a few meters, and the sound ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Shrugging off the odd occurrence, I climbed into bed, feeling slightly on edge. Sleep eventually claimed me around midnight. However, in the dead of night, around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a faint knocking sound. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, but when the knocking persisted, I couldn't ignore it. Turning towards the window, what I saw next nearly stopped my heart. Deciding to tidy up the kitchen before calling it a night, I busied myself with the dishes. Just as I was ready to hit the hay, a faint rumble caught my attention. Initially, I brushed it off as the gentle lapping of water against the boat. Curious, I peered out of the window, but the darkness obscured any view beyond a few meters, and the sound ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Shrugging off the odd occurrence, I climbed into bed, feeling slightly on edge. Sleep eventually claimed me around midnight. However, in the dead of night, around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a faint knocking sound. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, but when the knocking persisted, I couldn't ignore it. Turning towards the window, what I saw next nearly stopped my heart. As I glanced out the window, I spotted the silhouette of someone moving towards the cockpit area. Heart pounding, I sprang into action, grabbing my bait knife from the kitchen. With the curtains drawn, I hoped to remain hidden from whoever lurked outside, unless they were peering in through the front windows from the bow. Moments later, I heard the intruder attempting to force open the cabin door, but thankfully, I had locked it securely. Suddenly, a deep, menacing voice pierced the air, threatening to breach our sanctuary. As the intruder began kicking the sliding glass door, I called out urgently for Logan to wake up. Half asleep and disoriented, Logan stumbled in, demanding to know what was happening. With trembling hands, I passed him the knife, explaining that someone was trying to break in. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I dashed to the helm, firing up the engines and steering us back towards the safety of port. The sound of kicking ceased abruptly, replaced by the sound of hurried footsteps retreating towards the bathing platform. And then, a splash echoed through the night, signaling the intruder's hasty departure into the dark waters below. After spotting the intruder desperately swimming towards what must have been his own boat, Logan hurried back inside. We wasted no time in deciding to hightail it back to port, wanting nothing more than to put as much distance between us in that unsettling encounter. Once safely docked, we managed to catch a few hours of sleep before facing the morning. We still discuss the incident from time to time, reflecting on how unnerving it was to realize the intruder had been lurking around for hours. In hindsight, we concluded that the intruder's reluctance to abandon his own vessel likely prompted his sudden departure. Examining the damage to the door, we couldn't help but shudder at the thought of what might have happened if he'd managed to breach our defenses. It's chilling to consider the what-ifs, but in the end, we were fortunate to escape unscathed. It's a reminder to always stay vigilant, even in seemingly idyllic settings like the open sea.